Hello world and welcome to the next generation of What Does This Not Do? Why next generation will probably ask some. Quite simply because there was an original series of VCV-Rack 0.6.x with 14 episodes, and because with the release of Rack version 1 has changed so much that it does not make sense to me, as originally planned, to publish updates, but to start again with a completely new version. Of course, I do not intend to reinvent the wheel. I will not rediscuss modules that I have already presented and that have not been changed in V1, and only refer to the episode. Incidentally, I have also summarized the previously published episodes as PDF, so that you can read them unhurriedly. You can download this ebook with links to the corresponding sections in the videos via my GitHub page. In the new edition, which I will again produce in German, Franconian and English, an accompanying PDF will be published for each video, so that you can create your own reference work. In it you will not only find links to the modules, but also to the segments in the video. And I discuss similar modules from different manufacturers together, e.g. versions of the EvenVCO, Supersaw, etc. What is this about? The title What Does This Not Do reflects my thoughts when I'm sitting in front of a new module. Module? Okay, from the beginning. In the broadest sense, this is about music, especially synthesizers. Whoever gets off here, I recommend Googling for the term and to deal with the basics. For everyone else, it's all about the VCV-Rack Virtual Modular Synthesizer System. I do not want to go into all the details of this powerful creative tool, just a few key facts. VCV-Rack is free and open source. There are well over 1000 modules and most are free. VCV-Rack runs on Windows, Mac and Linux. VCV-Rack supports polyphony. VCV-Rack can send and receive both audio and MIDI data. And there is an incredibly great community that constantly communicates through Facebook or forum. I cannot say how grateful I am to Andrew Belt and the many module developers who make it all possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Of course, the variety of modules also brings a few questions. Basically, of course, anyone who deals with the matter knows what a VCO is. On closer examination of the various oscillators, however, almost all have some peculiarities that are not immediately apparent. And since the most exciting thing about module systems is the misappropriation of modules, it's extremely important to know what the individual components of a module do to use them for things they were not really designed for. I have often sat in front of it and asked myself, what does this knob do? That's why I've started to create a VCV-Rack work environment that allows me to compare and explore modules. I will describe my subjective impressions as simply as possible. I also work wherever I can with measurement methods and graphical representation, as this makes many things easier to understand. Again, in the first episode, I introduce my work environment or the modules I use. Whenever possible, I always try to keep this constellation, including the wiring. Over time, you will see all available modules, as I present them in groups according to their function, starting with oscillators or VCOs. For many modules there are also other great tutorials by experienced users who also show tips and tricks and also provide patches. Of course, I cannot list all of them here, but I have to mention a few, since otherwise I would have been hopelessly lost in the early days. Nigel Sixsmith, The Art of Sound Talking Ragheads, Omri Cohn, Andrew Mercer aka Bucky Durdle, Leonardo Laguna Ruiz, Vult Modules, Greg Brulette, Modular Curiosity, Hagen Überfuhr, The Clear Factor, Artem Leonov, VCV-Rack Ideas. You can find links to the important websites under the video, also to modules that you cannot download via the plugin manager. Basic information on installing and using VCV-Rack can be found on the official website. Do you have questions, wishes, suggestions? I am glad about every comment. My setup. I've installed VCV-Rack on Windows 10 and on the same machine in a Linux Ubuntu Studio partition. I will work here mainly under Linux, but in principle the platform for the function of the modules should play no role. Starting from the left, we first have the simple clock from JW Modules. Not only does it provide an extremely large range, 15 to 3840 BPM, it also offers different divisions of the original beat count through 4, 8, 16, 32, making me flexible enough for a variety of tasks. Currently my speed is 480 BPM. However, the various clock signals go first in Mute 8 from Bog Audio and then in Quantal Audio's Unity Mix, so I can mute or mix the unneeded clock pulses. Since Mute 8 has CV inputs, I can also activate the mute with it. The melody I generate with the JW Modules Note 616, which is up to 16 voice polyphonic, has a very easy to use random function and a built-in quantizer. Currently I use the polyphony with 3 channels and the scale C minor. The polyphonic volt per octave signal I send to split of VCV to split it into its 3 channels, and some also from VCV to generate from the 3 channels a mono signal. I also split the polyphonic gate signal into its 3 channels by means of a split module. Each channel of the 2 split modules goes into one input of the Bog Audio Matrix 88 module and can be mixed there with the potentiometers, with other input signals and assigned to outputs. In addition, each channel from split goes to an input of Snake from Southpole, which is a wireless multicore. All Snake modules with the same number are connected together, so that the input signals can be tapped everywhere. I hereby send signals to the test module, or from the test module to the matrix or the modulation path. Another input from Matrix 88 is occupied by brains from geodesics, which I use as sample and hold to add an LFO signal in sync with the clock. An output of Matrix 88 is for a gate signal to the ADSR envelope of fundamental VCV. And I combine 3 more outputs in a merge module of VCV and can generate a polyphonic signal from these. Another output from Matrix 88 goes to my reference oscillator VCO1 from Fundamental VCV. All oscillators are compared with this because I define this as the default. Because of the better distinction, I call this signal path 1 and the test module as signal path 2. Both signal paths receive the same signal from the sequencer. Signal path 2 via another output from Matrix 88 through Snake. Both signal paths are picked up directly at the module and graphically compared. The frequency response is displayed using the Bog Audio XL analyzer, the frequency in numbers using NIST's Hot Tuner, and the waveform using the TroverSoft multiscope. The colors of the frequency gradients are automatically set by the analyzer, so I have chosen the same color for the cables as well as the waveforms in the oscilloscope. Green is always signal path 1, i.e. the VCO1. In addition, the output signal of both signal paths is passed once unchanged to the Squinky Labs mixer form and once to the ABY switch of AS modules, so that each can also be routed through the filter VCF of Fundamental VCV. The LPF low-pass filter output of the VCF is connected to the input of the VCA1 of Fundamental VCV, which in turn is modulated by the ADSR, creating a slightly percussive sound. The output of the VCA goes into another channel of the mixer. The mixer is connected to the VCV audio module and thus to my system speakers. The two aux ways of the mixer I use for the reverb module XFX Reverb of Blamsoft and the delay module Chronoblob 2 of Allright Devices. Other modules include Vult's Hyperpower, which provides flexible voltages, the dual attenuator from Befaco, which are used to amplify, attenuate and offset signals, the Befaco slew limiter for soft transitions, and Vult's Caudal for randomly generated voltages and different variants of the triggered switch from ML modules for switching. This listing is not exhaustive because with some oscillators I will certainly use other modules. Modules of VCV and their versions. Numerous developers determine the variety in VCV-Rack, but some modules are also provided by VCV itself. Whereas fundamental and core modules used to be referred to here, they are now jointly managed under VCV. Here you will find all the modules that are automatically installed during the installation of Rack, but also purchased VCV premium modules. If you also want to support VCV financially, you should definitely look at it and get it. Also the Audible Instruments modules, which are VCV versions of Eurorack modules from Mutable Instruments, and the Befaco modules, which also correspond to hardware modules, as well as the module E-Series Cloud Generator, and the Grayscale modules, not yet available for V1, are offered by VCV itself. Because VCV-Rack is open source, some modules come with versions from different developers. In this first episode, I introduce all these modules. As already mentioned, I use the VCO1 from Fundamental VCV as a reference module because for me it represents a standard against which other modules have to compare and Of course, because the fundamental modules are part of the basic configuration of VCV-Rack. I will always refer to this standard in my consideration, so I define this here first of all on the basis of the VCO1. It has a pitch of ±4 octaves and can be tuned steplessly with the frequency control. For fine-tuning of ±3 semitone steps, an extra knob is available. The 4 standard waveforms, sine, triangle, sawtooth and square, can be used simultaneously and each have their own output jack. To compare the same waveform with different modules, I connected all outputs to the 8x3 to 1x3 triggered switch from ML modules. This allows me to change the waveform of up to 3 modules at the same time with one click. The square wave can be changed in the pulse width by a rotary knob, and this can also be controlled by a CD. The same applies to the frequency modulation. There is an input for external synchronization, and you can choose between hard and soft sync, as well as between analog and digital waveform. The functional VCO by Squinky is a one-to-one implementation of the VCO1 and was created as a CPU more economical version. Meanwhile, however, VCO1 is very economical, so that there is hardly any difference in this regard. But it is different in the frequency response. Here, the VCO1 shows a lot more overtones, even with the sine wave. In analog mode, the differences are marginal, but the digital mode shows huge differences. The purple curve is the functional VCO and shows a clean frequency response exclusively from the base frequency, as it should be with a sine wave. The green curve is as always the VCO1, and here you can clearly see overtones that should not be there. Thus the frequency response is almost like a triangular wave, as you can see very well here in the analyzer. Squinky Labs has gone to great lengths to reduce aliasing, and the result is clearly visible across all waveforms. You can hear the aliasing, especially in high pitches. The VCO2, here the red curve, differs in details from the VCO1, but shows the same frequency response. It has no 4 individual outputs for the waveforms, but only one output, and the waveform can be continuously adjusted via the controller wave or CV. Nevertheless, all standard waveforms are possible, but also mixed forms. The modules also support 16-voice polyphony. As I said before, the VCO1 will be with us all the time, both in the frequency analysis and in the oscilloscope. It can always be recognized by the green curve. From the beginning, the EvenVCO from Befaco was one of the most popular oscillators in VCV-Rack. To compare this and its variants, I have changed my setup something or expanded. Using ML modules triggered switch 8 to 1, I select between the 3 oscillators to be compared, and with a second triggered switch, I select the EvenVCO's waveforms. The chord by Amalgamated Harmonics has a low output volume, so I use the Mixer 2 from Audible to pick it up, so it matches with the other 2 modules, as you can see in the analyzer. Green is my reference oscillator, pink the EvenVCO, orange the EV3 of Squinky Labs, and blue the chord, where both channels can be seen. The oscilloscope shows that a sine wave was selected for all oscillators. In the analyzer, we all see the clean frequency response of a sine wave, and in comparison, the overtone-rich version of the VCO1. At first glance, it looks pretty unspectacular. Its range goes from 32 feet to 1/16 feet, which corresponds to C0 to C9, and this is set via the large octave knob. The categorization in foot is a tribute to classical church organs, so the tone C in octave 0 would be generated with a 32 long whistle. The preset pitch 1 thus corresponds to a C5 with 523.25 Hz. About the tune control, depending on the octave, still a fine tuning in the range of plus minus semitone steps is possible. There are 2 volt per octave inputs, resulting in e.g. transpositions are very simple. FM and heartsync can be controlled by CV, but there is also no eternal setting option. So far, the EvenVCO is more Spartan. Also, the pulse width of the square wave can be controlled by CV, and there is also the PWM controller. Other waveforms are triangle, sawtooth, sine and even. The latter waveform is the peculiarity and the namesake of the oscillator, a waveform in which the even overtones are emphasized. This sounds rounder than a pulse wave, but sharper than a triangle wave. What makes the EvenVCO a classic is simply its sound. It sounds warm and analog. In the oscilloscope we also see that the waveforms are not perfect, just like an analog oscillator should be. Thanks to Martin Lüders of ML Modules, the EvenVCO is now polyphonic. Variants of the EvenVCO are the chord from Amalgamated Harmonics and the EV3 from Squinky Labs. In principle, the chord is 6 EvenVCOs with stereo output. It has 6 input jacks for each 1 volt per octave signal, with the first jack polyphonic and distributes the signal to all channels. The wave parameter selects the desired waveform between sine, sawtooth, triangle, rectangle and even. The octave control determines the range from plus minus 3 steps. Detune unfortunately only has a circumference of plus minus 1 semitone, which means that no internal chords are possible. PW is, as usual, the pulse width of the square wave, which can also be controlled by PWM via CV. The amount of this modulation is set with PWM CV. Each voice has its own volume control, ATTN, and via PAN, these can be distributed via the stereo field. Spread affects the distribution of all voices relative to the center of the stereo field. As the name implies, Squinky Labs EV3 offers 3 EvenVCOs in one module. These can act as separate units or as overall sound, and chords are also possible here, because next to the octave slider, which goes from 0 to 9, there is a slider for semitones, which even indicates the interval to the root note for VCOs 2 and 3. I'm excited. Fine is the usually plus minus 1 semitone slider for beats, and mod determines the amount of FM modulation and is therefore connected to the FM input. PW is connected for manually setting the pulse width of the square wave, and PWM for the control VCV, and therefore also with a corresponding input socket. The waveform is selected by clicking on the corresponding icon. There are 5 waveforms known from the EvenVCO, plus the ability to mute any oscillator. Oscillator 2 and 3 can be synchronized with Oscillator 1. Just set the slider to sync. Each oscillator has its own input. If underlying inputs are not assigned, they will receive the same signal as the input above. This allows an input signal to be output in multiple voices and each voice mixed separately. In addition to the 3 individual outputs, there is also a total output. The ratio of the 3 oscillators is set by means of the 3 small black knobs. These must therefore be turned on before you get a signal at the sum output. Let us come to the sound comparison. Since this is always subjective, I use once again to visualize the analyzer from Bock Audio in the XL version. Here we see that there are hardly any differences in sound between the modules, except for the triangular wave. Oddly, the chord's frequency image looks more like a sawtooth wave, and the view of the scope confirms this. We hear and see a sawtooth that is 1 octave higher than the other waveforms. I therefore assume that this is a bug. Which is the better oscillator? I will not answer this question because they sound the same if only one oscillator is used. The EvenVCO by Befaco is the uncomplicated classic that can process 2 input signals simultaneously, which can be used simultaneously with 5 different waveforms. The chord is not quite major, capable of processing 6 input signals simultaneously, which are output as a stereo signal. Each of them can have different characteristics, as well as being out of tune with each other and distributed in the stereo spectrum. As a result, wide and fat floating sounds are possible. The EV3 is the efficient universal module and not just for CPU consumption. It can process 3 input signals simultaneously and output them either separately or as a total. In addition, it offers a variety of modulation options and can generate chords, and this with only 1 input signal. No matter which version you choose, the EvenVCO and its descendants are a must-have. I did not expect the keyframer mixer from Audible Instruments, which corresponds to Multiple Instruments frames, to be in oscillators. In episode 13 I considered his assignment as a VCA and had to look at his abilities as an LFO in a later episode. At the time he was not yet listed as VCO. Now he is, and that has of course made me curious. And I only look at this today for the VCA properties. I refer to the episode, and LFOs come later. In general, you can of course use any LFO as a VCO by increasing the frequency accordingly. In the context menu we can select the operation as LFO, and it is immediately noticeable that a large frame slider is colored, as if you have already saved frames. This is because a control voltage is already applied here, because this controller defines the basic speed or frequency of the LFO. If I move this from left to right, the color and the speed change, so the frequency of the waveform increases. The frame input with the attenuator modulation also affects the frequency, so here also a volt per octave signal for pitch change can be introduced. With the slider plus 10 volt offset, the all input gets a signal of 10 volts. Alternatively, of course, at the inputs also an external voltage can be introduced, and a combination is also possible. The voltage introduced here affects the signals of the 4 channels and is not a CV for the 4 channel controllers. These now each have different functions. The controller for channel 1 controls the waveform. It reads interpolated from a wavetable. The channel 2 knob controls the difference in wavetable position between each channel. In the middle position, all channels have the same waveform. When rotated, each channel receives a different wavetable waveform. The controller for channel 3 controls the phase or frequency offset between the individual channels. In the middle position are phase and frequency synchronous. Turn clockwise to get a phase shift between the channels. Counterclockwise, a frequency shift. Finally, the controller for channel 4 controls a kind of phase modulation or transition between the channels. In the middle position, all channels are independent. Turned clockwise, each channel is increasingly modulated by the next channel. Turned counterclockwise, each channel is increasingly modulated by the previous channel. Each channel has its own output, so basically we have 4 different oscillators available. However, there is also the mix output, where the signal of all 3 outputs is applied. If the individual outputs are not assigned, then there is a total signal of all channels. In this mode, you cannot save frames. Therefore, the output FR step has no function. As an oscillator, frames is definitely very experimental but also interesting. Thanks to remove and micromap from Störmelder, some wishes that I would have had come true, because of course I missed the possibility to control the channel controllers via CV. These possibilities enhance this unusual oscillator enormously. Audible Instruments macro oscillator and its Southpole counterpart CornrowsX, both versions of braids from Mutable Instruments, were introduced in episode 5, so I refer to that. In the meantime, Mutable Instruments has released Plates and Audible Instruments the Macro Oscillator 2. Of course, Plates or the Macro Oscillator 2 does not have the diverse resources of braids. I mean the braids illustrated cheat sheet, and the meanwhile 32 videos by Omri Cohn. For plates, there is only one video of VCV-Rack ideas called Mutable Instruments Plates in VCV-Rack 15 Tips and Tricks, which I highly recommend. Of course, that also means that I cannot refer to other material and therefore I need to go into more detail here. Braids has 45 synthesis models whose names are shown on the display. Plates completely eliminates the display and provides only 16 synthesis models. What at first looks like a slim turns out to be an extension of the possibilities when looking closely, because effectively Braids has only 6 different synthesis models, since each one has several variants. Braids has basically provided changeable presets. Plates actually has several synthesis models on board, and these can be modulated with 4 parameters each. The synthesis models are selected by a click in one of the black circles above the row with green and red circles, which also have a symbol of the synthesis form but are too small for my taste. Fortunately, VCV-Rack has the zoom function, or you can go directly to the context menu, which is invoked as usual by right-clicking and select the model from the list. Here we also see that this module has a low CPU function and a low-pass gate, whose processing is activated here. The 4 parameter knobs are frequency, harmonics, timbre and morph. Except for frequency, which adjusts the pitch in the range of 8 octaves, the function of the knobs depends on the chosen synthesis model. So here too, I hope for a quick overview a la Braids Illustrated. At the moment you have to make do with the official quick start by Mutable Instruments. Below I give a brief overview of the synthesis models and the function of the controllers. In general, timbre is used to set the timbre between dark, diffuse and light dense. Morph varies the sound, and harmonics controls the frequency distribution or balance between the different parts of the sound. Important for the understanding is at this point also that the module has 2 outputs, and the output aux is another variant of the sound, and this too depends on the model. In the pair of classic waveforms model, a virtual analog synthesis of classical waveforms, harmonics regulates the detuning between the 2 waves. Timbre, a variable square wave, from short impulse to full waveform to hard sync formants. Morph creates a variable sawtooth, from triangle to the Braids seesaw, the Yamaha CS80 sawtooth. The output aux outputs a sum signal consisting of 2 hard-synced waveforms whose shape is controlled by morph and detuned by harmonics. The wave-shaping oscillator generates an asymmetric triangle which is processed by a wave shaper and a wave folder. Harmonics defines the waveform of the wave shaper. Timbre determines the intensity of the wave folder. Morph its asymmetry. At aux, a variant with a different wave folder curve can be tapped. 2 operator FM means 2 sine wave oscillators mutually modulate each other's phase. Harmonics detunes the frequency. Here also inharmonic intervals are possible. Timbre defines the modulation index, in principle the timbre or the amount of overtones. Morph generates feedback either to the right of the center, as operator 2 modulates its own phase, or to the left of the center by modulating the phase of operator 1. aux is a sub-oscillator. The granular formant oscillator is a simulation of formants and filtered waveforms by multiplication, addition and synchronization of segments of sine waves. Harmonics determines the frequency ratio between formant 1 and 2, timbre their frequency and morph their width and shape. Aux has a filtered waveform, a replica of the Z models of braids. In this case, harmonics controls the filter type, peak, LP, BP, HP. The harmonic oscillator is an additive mixture of harmoniously connected sine waves. Harmonics specifies the number of fluctuations within the amplitudes of the spectrum, timbre which overtones should be emphasized, and morph the form of the fluctuation between the amplitudes, from flat and wide to pointed and narrow. Aux offers a variant that contains only the overtones of the drawbars of a Hammond organ. The wavetable oscillator contains 4 banks of 8x8 waveforms assessed via row and column, with or without interpolation. With harmonics, you take the bank selection. Turn to the left the 4 interpolated banks, turned right the same 4 banks in reverse order, without interpolation. Timbre is the row index. Within a row, the waves are sorted by spectral brightness. Morph is the column index, and the aux output is a lo-fi signal. Chords plays 4 tone chords with either a VA or wavetable oscillator. Harmonics defines the chord type. Timbre is responsible for a chord progression and transposition. Morph defines the waveform. On the left side of the middle you can choose raw waveforms that are known from string machines. To the right of the middle a small wavetable is scanned. Aux is the root of the chord. Vowel and speech synthesis is a collection of speech synthesis algorithms. Harmonics fades between formant filtering, SAM and LPC vowels, and then goes through several banks of LPC words. With timbre, the species is selected from Daleks to chipmunks. Morph is used for phoneme or word part selection. A word is triggered with a pulse in the trigger input. The intonation is controlled with a FM attenuator and the speech speed with the morph attenuator. In this case, the attenuators operate without a dedicated input signal. Once a voltage is applied, these attenuators work again as usual. Aux is the signal of unfiltered vocal cords. The following red models are primarily for noises and percussive sounds. The granular cloud is a swarm of 8 sawtooth waves with an envelope. Harmonics defines the intensity of a random pitch change. Timbre sets the density of the grain signal. Morph its duration and overlap. On aux, a variant with sine wave oscillators can be tapped. Filtered noise produces white noise with a variable clock frequency, which is processed by a resonant filter. Harmonics determines the type of filter, from left LP to middle BP to right HP. Timbre is the clock frequency and morph the filter resonance. Aux has a variant with 2 bandpass filters whose separation is controlled by harmonics. Particle noise sends noise particles through networks of all-pass or bandpass filters. Harmonics specifies the intensity of a random frequency change, timbre the particle density, and morph the filter type. In the left area, all-pass filter with reverb, right, bandpass filter with resonance. Aux provides a raw noise signal. We know the terms inharmonic string modeling and modal resonator bank from Rings in VCV-Rack, resonator from Audible Instruments, and annuli from Southpole. So it's about steering a vibration. This usually requires a trigger signal, but in plates this can also be done internally with noise particles. The function of the controllers are the same for both models. Harmonics determines the degree of harmony or material. Timbre defines the timbre of excitation by the trigger and the density of the noise particles. Morph affects decay time and energy absorption. Aux is the raw excitation signal, either the trigger or the noise particles. With the analog bass drum model, harmonics corresponds to the attack time, timbre of the timbre, morph of the decay time, and with aux, another classic bass drum sound can be tapped. In the analog snare drum model, harmonics control the balance between the harmonic and noise components, while timbre determines the balance between different drum modes, such as flat or rimshot. Morph is also the decay time here, and at aux another alternative version can be tapped. In the analog hi-hat model, harmonics determines the balance between the metallic sound and the filtered noise. Timbre is the cutoff of the internal high-pass filter. Morph is again the decay time, and aux is a variant of the sound based on ring-modulated square waves. For the last 5 models, the internal low-pass gate is disabled, as each has its own decay envelope and filter. In general, however, this is active on all models when a signal is present at the trigger input and can be changed by activating the Edit LPG Response Decay option in the context menu. Then it is possible with the slider timbre to set the ratio between pure VCA and VCFA, i.e. VCA plus filter. On the far left, the VCFA has 100%, to the far right, the VCA. The morph slider adjusts the LPG slack time and the decay time of the internal envelope. The 4 yellow LEDs, which indicate the value of the parameters in plates, we search in Macro Oscillator 2 in vain. The synthesis model can also be changed by CV. As soon as a control voltage is inserted into the corresponding socket, 2 LEDs light up. The permanently lit always indicates the currently selected model. The flashing one, the average value reached at 0 volts. This can still be selected manually. In addition, if there is a trigger signal, the model will only be changed if this is triggered. Timbre, frequency, morph and harmonics also have their own CV inputs, with only the first 3 of them having an attenuator. These attenuators influence the internal decay envelope without input but with trigger signal. With a signal in the trigger input, this is triggered. Also the physical and percussive models, and the value of the model CV input is thereby sampled and held. In addition, the internal low-pass gate is excited unless there is a signal in the level input. A signal at the level input opens the internal low-pass gate to control its amplitude and tone together. It also sets an accent on physical and percussive models. Controlling as many parameters as possible with just a few controls is the specialty of Mutable Instruments, Audible Instruments, and with plates, Macro Oscillator 2, this has been further enhanced. If this condition exists, the control fulfills this function. This could be a general formula with which one can describe this module. Anyone who does not read manuals will probably never exhaust all possibilities. At least I would never have thought of turning on knobs whose input jacks are empty. So I recommend this time not only to experiment but also theoretically to deal with the possibilities. Tides from Mutable Instruments is now also available in the second version. The name has remained the same with Mutable Instruments. In VCV-Rack, the module is called Tidal Modulator 2 by Audible Instruments. The VCV-Rack variants of the predecessor model from Aepelzens Parasites, Audible Instruments, Southpole and Southpole Parasites were introduced in episodes 3 and 5. In Rack V1, the Parasite variants are not yet available. The new version of Tides has more controls and sockets compared to its predecessor. But this still had the alternative firmware sheep, lamps, and there were the Parasites modes, 2 drunks and 2 bumps. So I filled the whole episode 3 with this module. Therefore, it is of course very exciting to explore the possibilities of the successor. Let's start once again with the inputs and outputs. The 6 input sockets of the upper row are all CV input sockets, and the lines show which parameter they belong to. From left to right are slope, frequency, volt per octave, smoothness, shape, and shift level. Of course, the volt per octave input is also connected to the frequency parameter, but of course follows the usual scaling. The trigger gate input is only marked as trig. However, the selected envelope mode determines how a signal is processed here. In AD mode, a trigger resets the envelope to 0 volts and initiates an attack decay cycle. Regardless of how short the trigger is, the attack decay cycle is always completed. In cycle mode, a trigger resets the oscillator so that it starts a new ascending phase. In AR mode, the rising edge of the gate causes the envelope to rise from its current value to +8 volt, and the falling edge of the gate causes the envelope to drop from its current value to 0 volt. Just like an ADSR envelope with a decay time of 0 and a maximum sustain level. The clock input is for the generation of tempo or frequency controlled signals. When this input is busy, the frequency knob controls the ratio between the frequency of the signal sent to that input and the frequency of the signals generated by tides. For the outputs, there are 4 modes, which are selected by the black round button on the top right. In the initialized state, the associated LED is off. This mode is called different shape. The 4 outputs produce 4 different waveforms that pass through Tides' entire signal processing chain. Shift level acts like an attenuator on the main signal. The waveforms are all dependent on the other controls, but you can say that output 1 is the main signal, output 2 is a raw asymmetric triangle, output 3 is a pulse at the end of the attack phase, and output 4 is a pulse at the end of the release phase. A click on the button activates the green LED and thus the mode different amplitudes. In this mode, the shift level knob is used to select the output to which the signal is sent, with the crossfading between adjacent outputs being smooth. So it is possible to route the signal from Tides to different destinations. Click again to activate the yellow LED and the different times mode. In this mode, the shift level knob shifts the vertex of the waveform over time. This effect is achieved by applying a different slope setting for each output in AD or AR mode, or by applying a phase shift between each output in cyclic mode. Another click finally activates the red LED and the mode different frequencies. In this mode, the shift level knob adjusts the frequency ratio between the outputs. In the middle position, all outputs are set to the same frequency. Turn clockwise to increase the frequency of outputs 2, 3 and 4. Turning counterclockwise decreases their frequency. At low frequencies, this produces polyrhythmic LFOs. With a low slope value, one can produce signals whose edges are sharp enough to drive other modules. At audio frequencies, this creates chords. Let's jump to the left. Here again we have a black round button, next to it an LED and 3 colored circles. A sure sign that we can choose something here. Here it is the frequency range, more precisely the frequency of the frequency knob in the middle position. In the initialized state, the yellow LED lights up. This is the 2 Hz range intended for rhythms and modulations, e.g. also for the operation as LFO. With a click on the button, the LED changes to red, which corresponds to a center frequency of 130.8 Hz and thus to the audio range. In this setting, Tides works as an oscillator, which of course we will deepen soon. But first back to the green LED, which we activate again by clicking, and thus a very low frequency mode of 1/8 Hz, which is predestined for slow movements and beats. Another black round button with LED and colored circles screams for attention in the middle of the module. Here the type of envelope is selected. Again, in the initialized state, the yellow LED lights up, which means we have a cyclic bipolar oscillation here. Cyclic says very clearly that we do not need a trigger for this, so in principle also optimal for operation as an oscillator. Red LED means unipolar attack release envelope, which is an envelope that is triggered and goes into the release phase after reaching its highest point. Similar is the green mode, except that here an attack decay envelope is generated. If you have seen episode 14 about envelope generators, you know that the difference is that during the decay phase, the key is still pressed and the drop in amplitude is voltage controlled, while the release is triggered by releasing the keys and the time to reach the value 0 volts. And all these choices can now be combined with each other and be influenced by the parameters of controllers and CV inputs. The frequency control is of course responsible for the pitch. Its circumference is ±4 octaves around the center frequency, which is selected with the button above. When one of the envelope modes is selected, its speed increases in a clockwise direction and decreases counterclockwise. Shape fluently defines the shape of the envelope. In the middle, linear, left exponential, right logarithmic. Slope sets the ratio between the durations of the rising and falling segments of the envelopes. Classic envelope generators have separate attack and decay controls. In Tides, you first set how fast the whole envelope is completed with frequency. Then you set how much time is spent for the decay or release relative to the attack with slope. Smoothness is responsible for the waveform transformation. Counterclockwise, a 2-pole low-pass filter is used to smooth the edges of the waveform. Clockwise, a wavefolder inserts kinks and jolts into the shape of the waveform. Shift level controls the polarization of the outputs and their displacement. Depending on the output mode, this controller adjusts either the amplitude and polarity of the first output or the amplitude, time, frequency shift between each of the 4 outputs. With a clock signal or a clean and pure oscillator signal at the clock input, Tides follows the frequency of that clock oscillator and multiplies it by a ratio set with the frequency knob. A 1-to-1 ratio is used when this knob is in the center position. If the trigger input remains free, an AD or AR envelope is generated at each pulse of the clock, the oscillations of which are in phase with the clock. Again, the frequency control multiplies or divides the clock signals. It is also possible to feed a signal into both inputs, clock and trig. In this case, tides must receive a trigger on the trigger input to generate an envelope, but adjusts the envelope duration to match the external clock frequency. Tempo synchronized LFOs, the generation of just intonation chords, or overtones, as well as time, division, multiplication, phase shifting, are possible with this function. And finally, we also come to the audio capabilities of tides, so its use as an oscillator. Well, that's what it's actually in this episode. Because we perceive the different frequency ranges differently, tides adjusts its behavior when the frequency range selector is set to audio. The shape control offers different waveforms that differ significantly in sound. The slope controller uses a linear curve instead of exponential for smooth pulse width modulation effects. To avoid aliasing, the range of the shape and smoothness controls is limited when generating high frequency tones. In the red output mode, a different set of frequency ratios corresponding to the musical intervals is selected for each output. Another algorithm that favors pitch accuracy and lack of jitter is used for the clock input. This algorithm assumes that there is a periodic waveform at the clock input and does not guarantee that the phase of tides signal will match the phase of the eternal clock. Conversely, when the frequency range selector is set to the lower or middle frequency setting, tides follows precisely that phase of the clock and can follow irregular but repetitive rhythmic patterns, clocks with shuffle swing. In order to put the whole thing into practice, I have now chosen the setting red, yellow, red, i.e. audio range with cyclic cores and different frequencies at the 4 outputs. The 4 audio signals I bring together and thus have the possibility of a polyphonic sound. This one is not that overwhelming, so I'm looking with a shape controller for a nice waveform. The folded on the right side I like very well, and with some LFO modulation it comes in motion. With a shift level control I influence the frequency of the 4 outputs. Well, that sounds very unusual. With a shape control clockwise I add to the sound even more overtones. Now the sound needs a rhythm, yet so a trigger in the input trigger. Well, that sounds great. The parameter slope controls my envelope, so I modulate this also by CV. Smoothness is still causing me too much noise, so I am driving it back a bit and voila! We have a well-grooving 80s synth line, which of course can be varied even further, e.g. with LFOs with different speeds, and filters, and of course together with a macro oscillator too. These modules are fun, they sound fantastic and are extremely versatile. But they are not easy to handle, you have to deal with it, but it's worth it. I have already introduced the resonator from Audible Instruments and Annuli from Southpole in episode 9 and refer to it. I have also already introduced the E-Series cloud generator, which corresponds to the synthesis technology E340 cloud generator in episode 7. Meanwhile, however, this is polyphonic, which is a tremendous added value for this module. Otherwise, nothing was changed, so I refer to this episode. And so we are already at the end of episode 1 of the new edition of What Does This Knob Do? As mentioned in the beginning, I present the oscillators in the order of their appearance, and I hope to create a new episode every week. Next time, I will take a closer look at all supersaw oscillators and compare them. As always, you will find links to the most important websites and also to the developers of the modules introduced this time. And not to forget, many thanks to Andrew Belt and all the module developers, without whom all this would not be possible. That's it from me. Let it go well. Servus.